All stories submitted by Deion Hayz. Scary story number 1. The Little People in the Earth. So this happened many years ago. I was still in high school then, maybe a junior or a senior that year. Those years were fuzzy to me now that I think about it. At that time, I had a group of friends who were into playing with airsoft guns. Basically, they're guns that shoot plastic BBs, and they would shoot at each other, and they'd form teams, then battle with one another in a secluded area. I was a part of those battles too. We used to battle on my family's property. Later, my family members started complaining about the big groups of friends that would come around. Of course, we were boys, so we always left a big mess. After this, we needed a new location to play at. We thought about a new location called Area 7 in Shiprock. But honestly, it was an area where lots of people would go drinking and actually shoot off real guns, so we decided against this idea. A younger kid named Jacob said he wouldn't mind us using his place, and even got permission from his dad, so it was great. The new location was Hogback. The family's property also had a farm, which made it great to play during the daytime. We usually started around 12ish till like 5 p.m. We would draw teams randomly so that there was no favoritism and ruin the whole game. We also had walkie-talkies because cell phone service was terrible in the Hogback area. It was basically a dead zone. One Saturday, everyone started meeting at the new location of Jacob's farm area. We did our random team drawings. After doing so, we branched off into 4 teams of 3, so altogether we had 12 players. I was paired with Brandon and Jacob. We didn't have time to explore the area or map out how far we could go. We figured it would be common sense of where the map would end. We all walked into separate areas and set a timer for 20 minutes to get established before the game started. Jacob sorta knew the area because he lived there. But he did mention he didn't like exploring alone because his family told him not to do that. We figured it was because of wild animals like snakes, spiders, coyotes, etc. I mean, we heard a few rumors about this area, but nothing really significant. Mostly drunk people walking by the main highway. However, we were far away from the main road. Hogback looked like you could spend the whole day climbing on top of the ridge, but we stayed in those carved spiky canyon areas for the game. Later, as we were just starting to settle on our spot, when out of nowhere, we heard Jacob's dad yelling and honking the horn. Apparently, he needed Jacob for something. For what? I don't know. So he headed back with his dad, leaving Brandon and I. With just us 2 behind, we decided to stay put in the same location. But we were kind of worried that our spot might have been given away by the noise. The timer to the game hasn't gone off yet, so we figured that we were safe for now. Brandon and I began to make our move once again. Then we noticed we had 5 minutes left to find coverage, so we started to run faster to hide. I started outrunning Brandon. Eventually, I came over this ridge. I saw something that completely blended in with the environment. I barely had enough time to jump over it before crashing into the dirt. I yelled out to Brandon because he was coming over next, and he wouldn't have seen it either. Brandon came up slowly to the ridge area and saw where I had fallen to the ground. I told him to look out for that structure. He said, "What structure?" I said, "It's right in front of me." He then said, "I just see tan-colored dirt rocks." I told him to come down here and look. So unlike me, he found a difficult way to climb down to where I was. As he was making his way down, I got up and dusted myself off. Once he got down to where I was, I said, "Looks like a ruin or some sort of little house." He was shocked and said, "From other angles and from up top where I had been, it completely blended in with the environment. It was basically invisible." We looked around the structure, and we discovered it was a hogan, which is home in Navajo. This little structure was completely made out of stone rocks. This was small, and no human could possibly fit into it. The door was probably small enough for a toddler to fit through. I noticed Brandon seemed a little cautious, but he didn't exactly speak up right away. I was curious and thought maybe some kids made it, but the details and the setup was kind of advanced for kids. I mean, my dad was a carpenter, so I noticed a few things. Brandon took a look around the area and said, "This place is kind of secluded. Jacob and I never noticed a small house when we walked through here before. None of us have ever noticed this small structure until today, when I almost came crashing into it." I was curious, so I asked him, "Have you ever noticed anything like this before in your life?" He said, "No, but I have heard of little people. I've heard a few stories about little people who cause mischief and steal things." I asked him, "They're sprites or spirits, right?" Brandon said, "Well, they're worse. They're older than most tribes, and they live deep in the earth. Sometimes they're called mud people or dirt people." He explained that they will sometimes help people, play pranks, or they will do worse things than that. He mentioned that they sometimes would steal little kids or unwanted children, if they were either abused, orphaned, or if they were naughty. I guess it really depends on how the kids act, and it seals their fates. He also said that they can help in their situations, or transform them into little people to join them, or they will lure kids into their homes, or holes in the ground. The kids will fall into the earth, so far down into a cave system, and they break their bones from falling and unable to move, helpless. Once down there, they will all gather and eat them, or if the kids are unlucky, they get lost in the ground and never return, stuck in the dark to starve. He added that they're physical, yet they can also be shadows or spirits. They are ones with the earth in ways they can just disappear so easily. After he said that, I kind of thought he was just amping it up to scare me. Yet, I was still super curious about this little home. I said, "Well, it just looks like stone rocks stacked together. I don't see a hole in the ground." So I grabbed a stick that was close by, and I poked the inside of the entrance. I tapped the center, trying to hear if it sounded hollow. It was. And before I could do anything else, the middle of the inside of the stone hogan, an entrance opened up. The plate of the rock that I was poking at made a crack, and it was like a trap door. This crack wasn't big enough to where we could get a good look underneath the plate. It was covered in dirt. We had no idea that it was going to actually open up. That was the scary part for us. But the stick was still inside, so I put the tip of the stick into the dark opening, and I felt something tug on the other end. However, it wasn't a violent tug. It felt like a baby's hand, grabbing and shaking the stick gently. I turned and said, "Something is grabbing the end of the stick." Brandon said to me, "Stop, you're lying right now." "I'm not lying," I said. Then I felt the stick go normal, like it let it go, and I pulled the stick out and said, "Here, you try it." Brandon didn't want to and said, "No, that might piss it off." He was told not to mess with them, after all. He then apologized to that thing in Navajo. He said, "We need to leave an offering and go." So he apologized in Navajo and told it that we were leaving. After apologizing, the door closed back up, and it looked like there wasn't a secret plate or door anymore. We never got a good look at what it was, but obviously something was inside of that little house. I told him that we should take a picture really quick before we go. He was hesitant, but it was more for me. And that's the picture I have right here, which is on the screen right now. Brandon was in a rush to go, but before leaving, we left a Nutri-Grain bar in the entrance to signal a peace offering. We did that because we didn't know what that thing was going to do to us afterwards. We walked for about 10 minutes, and then we got ambushed by the guys. At this point, we completely forgot about the game, and we yelled, "Time out!" They didn't believe our reasoning for why we decided to stop. I showed them the picture, and the rest of the guys wanted to go back to take a look. When we tried to find our way back to it, we had completely lost track of where it was. This small house was nowhere to be found. We mentioned it blended in with the environment. If it wasn't for the picture, they wouldn't have believed us at all. We ended up looking for the other team instead with the other guys, since we were not in the game anymore, and we all wanted to head back to meet at Jacob's house. We did spot another small stone hogan, but it was further up on the ridge area, on a cliff that we couldn't get to. That was a strange experience, and we wondered how many there were out in the desert. That day, we were probably lucky or unlucky enough to have spotted 2 small houses. This was my personal experience with that encounter. Scary story number 2, The Beast of Farm Road. It was either early October or early November when this took place. I remember it felt a lot like fall. Leaves were scattered on the ground, the air was cool, basically jacket weather. I bring this up because around this time the moon is typically very big. It gets super close to us, and we have what feels like a 3 or 4 day cycle of full moons that light up the sky, and it makes everything look brightly lit. That's if clouds aren't in the way. Now, on this one specific night, it was a full moon. It didn't feel too late because the sun sets pretty early around this time of the year. I was probably 12 or 13 at the time. I went inside the trailer to see what my dad was doing, because he had been yelling my nickname from inside of the house. So I knew it had to be something good. My dad only calls me by my nickname when he's in a good mood. He was sitting down and putting on his boots. He said, "Hey, your mom's hungry for some Burger King. Do you want to go with me for a drive and so that you can pick out what you want?" I excitedly said, "Yes." My dad told me to run into the last room so that I can ask my mom what she wanted. I then wrote it down because she can be really picky. My dad was outside warming up the car. I proceeded to grab my jacket, locked the door, and hopped inside the big grayish white Astro van. We then headed down the dirt roads of where we lived, and then on top of the paved roads. This area is called the Farm Roads. As we drove up the winding hill, the moon was so bright, but it was behind clouds. My dad also mentioned to me that the moon looked really big tonight. As we were driving down the road, we drove past the 4th lane. My dad had taught me to keep an eye out in case there were cats or dogs on or near the roads. People here don't really take care of their animals, and they sort of roam around a lot. So sadly, there is a lot of roadkill that goes on. My dad hated that about where we lived. He pointed out how people should tie up their dogs. If their pet did die on the road, they should be responsible and give it a proper burial. We drove past the 3rd lane, and all was quiet. Surprisingly, there were no cars driving around. It was dark, but we could still see, even though the clouds covered the moon. We then passed the 2nd lane. Me and my dad were saying that we should maybe rent a movie before we got food. Then the 1st lane was coming up. I was sort of not paying attention anymore to the road. My dad hit the brakes. The tires then loudly screeched. We came to a complete stop in the middle of the road. I was freaking out. After all, I've just been tossed forward from the sudden stop of the car. I was going to ask my dad what happened. I saw him staring straight at the road, confused. I then turned my head towards the road. On the shoulder of the road, out came this big crawling creature on all 4s. I was confused too. This thing was big, basically the size of a full-grown grizzly, like the kind you see on TV. I thought it was strange because we don't really have bears out here. My dad turned on his high beams. It was at least 1 1/2 cars away from us. I took a better look at it, and it was hunched over on all 4s crawling. It had brown hair all over its body, but you could sort of see pink human flesh underneath its fur. Its legs were like a dog, and it had a tail. What really freaked me out was when my dad had turned on the high beams. It covered its face with one hand. It looked to me like a werewolf. Its eyes shined from the light, like those reflective eyes animals have. When it had its face covered, it crawled on its 3 legs, slowly. The thing tried to hurry across the road and get out of our way. It then stood up and walked over the barbed wire fence. It crawled on all 4 legs, walking towards the wooded area on our left. We both sat there for a few seconds. My dad turned the high beams off. He seemed to be deep in thought. I, on the other hand, was excited. I said to him, "Hey Dad, was that a werewolf? It looked like a werewolf. Did you see the tail? Dang!" My dad said calmly to me, as he was staring forward. He said, "I don't know what that thing was, but we are not going to talk about it anymore, okay?" I was confused. My dad liked scary stories and movies, but he seemed serious at that moment. So I remained quiet throughout the drive. Eventually, we got food from Burger King, but no movies. My dad seemed distracted and forgot. I didn't bring up the movies or whatever that thing we saw. To this day, I never talk about this experience with my dad. I'm scared that if I talk to him about it, he'll get mad at me or won't remember. I recall that a few days after this happened, I remember that I was listening into a conversation that some kids were having on a bus ride home from school. One of the kids talked about how his chickens were being eaten, and how his dad said it was probably just some wild dogs. I saw that kid get out towards the area where the werewolf had crawled off to. I didn't tell him what I saw. I think I know exactly what had happened to that kid's chickens. Scary story number 3, the Channel of the Dead. This happened when I was very young, probably about 7 years old, I'd say. It was a normal day when I was riding the bus back home from school. I got off at my stop like any normal day. My cousin Caleb also got off with me because at that time, Caleb had practically lived next door to me. I asked him if he wanted to come over to my house to watch some cartoons and hang out. He said sure. I knew that my mom and dad weren't going to be home, and I'd sometimes freak out when I was alone in a quiet house. So, we both headed inside to the living room. My family had those old wooden giant TVs, like the old school ones that weighed a ton. I've forgotten where we purchased that TV. Probably at a yard sale or a thrift store. At least the TV had color. It was clear and we never had any issues. We had an antenna hooked up so that we could watch local channels. You know, like the spiky metal ones that go above your house. It was attached to a metal rod that was next to the house, but we were able to twist it around to adjust the signal. That's just how it was back in the day. No DVD players, just VHS players. I found something good to watch, like Fox Kids or Magic School Bus or something like that. I don't exactly remember. I walked in the kitchen to get snacks for us. Caleb sat in front of the TV. The signal was fuzzy, so I told him that I would go out and adjust it. Once I got in the right position, Caleb yelled, "Right there, you've got it!" I locked it into place and ran back inside. After doing that, Caleb and I started watching cartoons, enjoying the episode. But then suddenly, the lights flickered, and we sorta freaked out. However, the TV went back to normal again. That didn't bother us too much, so we were like, whatever, and continued to watch the TV. Suddenly, it turned black, like someone turned it off. We jumped because the sound was loud, and it was that static noise, that shh noise. I got up to turn the volume down, but as soon as I was getting up, the lights turned off. When I glanced at the TV, inside of the TV screen, I saw a white/black fuzzy figure walking around. We were just staring at this figure, and we were like, "What the heck?" I said, "What is that?" Caleb said, "I don't know. Change the channel." I grabbed the remote to change it, but every channel was the same. It was just the same static figure on every channel. The figure was wearing a hood. He had no face, no emotion. We could only see the head and the upper chest area. That's all that was displayed. It then turned and looked right towards us. We freaked out. I ran to push the button to turn off the TV, but that didn't work. I ran to unplug it. That didn't work either, even when I tried plugging it in and out. To make matters worse, it was dark inside of the house, as we helplessly watched this creepy figure. It then turned to its side and walked out of the screen somewhere, and it was just all white static for a few seconds. Suddenly, the cartoons came back, and the lights turned on. We were so creeped out by this event that we decided to turn everything off, We went outside to wait for my parents to come back home. I never told my mom or dad about it. Was this static figure just a part of the television program? Was it just a ghost, an electronic problem, or even death himself? I don't know to this very day, but when that White Noise movie came out when I was a teenager, I laughed because that held nothing to me, because of the fear I had witnessed as a kid that day. I still hate white noise and static to this day. Well, that does it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And if you guys have any of your own scary stories, you guys can share them with me, and all my information will be found in the link in the description below. Plus, I hope I earned you guys a subscription, and please leave a like and comment down below. Panic with this coyote, and peace out.